Hi, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Briefcase. You've got myself, Paul Blaine, the host of the show, and I'm going to be asking some detailed questions and finding out a lot more about a very special guest today. But before I introduce them fully, if this is your first time watching Behind the Briefcase, first of all, you're going to love it. Second of all, I need you to go onto LinkedIn and press the follow Behind the Briefcase button, because if you do that, then you'll get all the up-to-date coming episodes, anything that drops, and lots of tips of things that you may want to think about going along. The second part to this is aired on YouTube and Spotify and other things like that. YouTube's the one I tend to go to. So if you are on YouTube, go over to YouTube and hit the subscribe button. I know a lot of people don't hit the subscribe button, but if you do, it means that any episode that lands, you will get a notification on that too. And then you can keep up to date. Also, if it's the first time you've watched this and you're thinking, oh, why have I never watched these before? Go onto that YouTube channel and you will see lots of different episodes from 2025 and the beginning of 2026. And you will get to listen to some very influential people. Now, when I say influential people, we are talking about CEOs of businesses, high-tech businesses, the world of technology. So we have Noel from Sri Lanka and DXDY. You've also got marketing experts such as York Smith, and you've got Harry Evans. You've got other people on there like Louis Worth, who is, I'm a bit of a fanboy, I'm going to admit. And I have such a great time every time I meet with him. But also you've got the Paula McGowan interview on there, which is a very emotional interview to watch and to see how that woman campaigned relentlessly to achieve what she did in the name of her son. Honestly, if you watch that one, you'll leave it empowered and ready to take on the world. And then you've also got the Christmas special, where I had lots of them in the room discussing lots of different things. So there's hours and hours of listening there for you to get your teeth into. And I'm sure it will give you some insightful things to take forward in your business world going into 2026 and beyond. So that's all the marketing stuff out of the way. That's the bit they make me do. I'm going to get into the bit that I really want to do and introduce today's guest, because we are speaking today to someone who knows a lot about regulation, both in previous life and in previous work life and in current work role, and works for one of the largest care operators in the UK. So you're going to get a lot from this one. I know I am. So I'm the one with the questions. I'll be getting a lot. So if I'm going to get a lot, you're going to get a lot. So I want to introduce you today to a very special guest, Sue Sheath. Sue, thank you very much for being on Behind the Briefcase.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Paul.
It is. It's an absolute pleasure. And I know you've been speaking on the circuit. I've seen you at different shows, so we'll get into that in a bit, what you've been speaking about. But do you want to just tell people what your role currently is within the organisation you work?
Yeah, I'm currently Director of Regulation and Quality Improvement at Barchester Healthcare, and I've been there just under 12 years now. So yeah, long time, and it's been a great time.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a substantial amount of time. We'll get into things that you've done throughout that 12-year experience. One of the things that we like to do here on Behind the Briefcase is to actually dig right back, because what I want people to understand is, who is the makeup of this person? How did she get to where she's got to? And you often find, without realizing, that starts in the origins of childhood to start making who you are. So take us back, Sue. Who was Sue as the child?
Gosh, well, I was born in Hertfordshire, and I have two brothers, and a father who was a finance director. Actually, in fact, we moved to Berkshire when I was about 7 years old, and moved to an area that could be closer to where he was going to be working, Bracknell. So he became the finance director of a pharmaceutical company. My mum was a housewife, and sadly both of them have passed away, but they were quite an influential force really on me and my childhood. We were always encouraged to strive and do well, and I always remember sitting down at do my homework. I had a special table at home that my dad bought me to make sure that I would sit in my bedroom and do my homework. So I was quite a compliant girl right from the start really. But we had a really loving, supportive, happy family, and I had great memories of my childhood. And you know, my brothers have gone on to do successful roles and are still doing so, and you know, I love them to bits. And we're although we're spread apart, you know, geographically, we still get on really well, and you know, lovely memories of my childhood really.
But it sounds to me like if all siblings have gone on to achieve really successful careers, as of you, then your parents must have been really influential in terms of almost building you to become who you became. When you talk about childhood, you mentioned about your dad and his job role, etc., like that, which is a very structured role. Mother being a housewife. So was it more a nurturing, you can achieve anything you want, or was it more a disciplined, you need to be really good at school, etc., like that?
I mean, I would say it was a bit of both, really. And my dad, as you say, was from a very sort of regulated background, and ironically, that's what I've ended up working in. So I would never have gone into finance. I was hopeless at maths. My dad used to absolutely despair during my maths homework times, and I think my maths teacher thought I was great, but I was getting a lot of support from my husband. My father. He didn't actually do my homework, but he did help me because I just I really struggle with numbers. And even though I've gone on to manage budgets, but it's never been my forte, so I knew I was never cut out for that. But I think that they were always keen that we did what we wanted to, that we pursued our choices. I mean, I then went on to do at school, I went to do my A levels, and I remember my maths teacher despairing that I was going to do sociology, and there was no way I was going to do maths, as you can imagine from what I've just said. So I chose sociology. My father was a bit perturbed, being a very right-wing conservative voter all his life, to suddenly be picking up this so-called left-wing subject. And actually, I loved it. I loved sociology because it was all about society. And I went on and did my degree in sociology and industrial relations. So it was just something that really appealed to me. It was really different, and I didn't want to do anything more technical than that, and I absolutely loved it, and that really carved out my career. But no, they were very encouraging of whatever we wanted to do. They just wanted to make sure we had the best chance in life. And I think, you know, school is important, and it's still really important, but obviously life experience adds to what you learn at school, and it is about that journey, as you've said earlier. And we were just encouraged to do well, and we were always told that if you got good results at school, it would set you up for life. And I think that's been true for me personally.
Love it. And obviously that influence, because majority of your work life has been around compliance and regulation, which we'll get into in a moment. So it's really interesting to see how something that probably wasn't, you didn't think was influencing you at the time, became a huge influence in your life. Absolutely. Okay, so you go to university, you do your degree, you come out of university. What are you doing with that degree? Where did you go to?
Well, it was interesting because it was a sandwich degree, as they called them at the time, where you had a year out on a placement. And I was really fortunate. I applied to a few companies. I managed to get the most amazing placement at British Airways. And again, it's a great story, really, because that's where I met my husband and so on. So I had a year working in their training and development department, ironically. And I got to go to America a couple of times on a program. So I was supporting the administration for a big management development program. BA were great in that era. Yeah. That was sort of in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. And so what I did, I worked through that year and got lots of opportunities. And then I went back to university, and I suddenly realized how much university was all about theory and how wonderful it was to have had some practical experience. So when I finished my degree, I then wrote back to British Airways and said, look, any chance of me coming back and getting a job with you? Because I just loved being in that environment. And I got a job in the industrial relations department, and my degree was sociology with industrial relations. So I'd landed the job I wanted out of university. And those were the days where you could leave university and get a job, and it was just that it was that straightforward. To be honest, I won't say it's easy, but it was straightforward. And I spent 14 years at British Airways, And it was just the best time because I mean, I have always loved travel. I remember as a child picking brochures up from the travel agents, sitting at home and saying to mum and dad, "Can we go to Spain? Can we go to Italy?" We never went abroad as children. There were three of us, and my dad had a good job, but they weren't that interested in traveling abroad. And I think there was a cost to it,
Yeah.
obviously. But I had always had in my head I wanted to travel. So getting to British Airways was also a double whammy because I got to travel and we could, you get good perks at British Airways, as you can imagine. And it was one of those companies where you could move. So I started on industrial relations. I then went into human resources mainstream, which is really where my degree was aiming. And then I was able to change jobs. And I then went to work for the travel shops and got some sales and sort of regional sales experience. And then I worked in cabin services and I met my husband in cabin services. I was the HR, one of the HR people, and he was a cabin crew and then became a manager, and that's where we met. And so my life changed by going there. And I worked there for 14 years, had an amazing time, learned lots, and then was able to change jobs and go into sales jobs and regional roles beyond that, completely different from HR. And I've never gone back to being an HR person, ironically. That's when I've got into other things. So yeah, I mean, that was just another milestone really for me in the early part of my career. So yeah, fantastic time.
It is amazing when you actually reflect back, because we don't do it enough and we don't talk about it enough, which is one of the main things behind this podcast, is to actually get people to see behind the LinkedIn profile or the Instagram posts, etc., like that, and see the real person, because backstories are so important in terms of how you build yourself to become who you are. You just mentioned there about you take on this dream job, but that job leads to other areas which would be unfamiliar with them. But because you met them with positivity, it actually started to build you into the business type person that would allow you to go into the corporate world, if you like, beyond the skill set of, even if it's HR. You've got lots of strings to your bow. I want to go back though, because you did say something very interesting there about the sandwich gap with the university. Because I actually agree with you. So I went to university late. I was someone myself that hated school. I just didn't get on with school, didn't get on with education. And I went back to do my teaching degree. I must have been around 30 years old. So I went into a degree where the average age in the classroom was around about 19, 20. And every theory that was read out, because teaching degrees are very much like psychology degrees, so every theory that was read out on people behavior, etc., how to motivate people, how to get people to learn, they were just getting eaten up by everybody in the room. But because I had lived experience, I'm the one that's still there going, that's bullcrap. that would not work in this situation. So I challenged almost I must have been a nightmare of a student, but I challenged everything. But I came away with the top grades because I was able to bring them into real life situations and amalgamate some theories so that they could work, as well as differentiate from a theory as to how it would be perceived, but how it would actually work in reality in the world if you actually started to include individual behavior patterns. And I've always believed that if I had just gone straight from school to university without real life experience, then what I would have done is I'd have read the book, learned the book, and then taught the book. And I don't think that's what education should be about. Education should be about how do you adapt what you're learning to create newer versions to make things better all the time. So I wish they'd done more of what you said in universities, where they forced people to take placements and go out into the real world in the same way that they do with nurses. People that do nurse training, go do placement, experience it, see how the theory works in a practical situation. So I loved hearing that. I love the fact that you got into this journey and you found this dream job and it brought about all these childhood dreams of travel and everything like that. And then it relates to, you meet your husband. It's a fairy tale story that we're going along. You go into sales, you're probably smashing that. So how the heck did you end up at CQC?
Well, that is an interesting story. So I'll go back a little bit before that because I think it's relevant. So I I'd spent, a few roles in retail. So I'd gone into the travel shops as part of British Airways, which is great because you could change careers. And then I left them, went and worked at a storage company, which was also retail sales, but it was storage. And that was a whole nother, I could tell you a whole load of stuff about people's storage habits are very interesting. But anyway, on another day. And then I went to work for Vodafone Retail, which was really different. That was very cutthroat. It was quite a male dominated environment. I found it quite difficult as one of the few females in the team. And it was a real sort of punch in the face sort of place, really. At the time, I joined at the time where sales, pay-as-you-talk sales were going through the roof. It was those early days of mobile phones, if you remember that long ago. That's how old I am. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so it was quite a challenging place to work. I did well, but there were changes coming and I decided, right, I'm going to get out and I'm going to go do something else. So I jumped ship. I took a complete change, really. I wanted to look at other things. And I think I took a break and I started going for interviews again. And I was on a train. I'd been for an interview and it was in retail sales again. I thought, oh, do you know what? Do I really want to do this? And I happened to have bought a newspaper that day. And I don't often buy newspapers, if I'm honest, only at the weekends. And I read this newspaper and there was an advert for a job in a government agency, brand new government agency. And I thought, what the hell? I'm going to apply because it's so different. And I did. It was called the Security Industry Authority and it was set up to clean up the private security industry. There were all these awful stories about bouncers on nightclubs, dealing with their fists and sorting people out on the nightclub door rather than managing it through talking. And I joined this organisation at the start and I sat in my interview amongst all these people who were HMRC, DWP people, the police. I thought, oh my God, what is this girl from retail doing? But anyway, I got the job and I wanted an area in the southeast where I live. And they said, well, we can't offer you London and the southeast. That's been gone somewhere else. We'll give you Wales. I went, Wales? Well, okay, I can get on the M4 and I'll drive to Wales. Anyway, I took it. I thought, oh, do you know what? I just want to do this because it's so different. So I spent about 5 years there and we literally regulated the private security industry. And honestly, there's a whole load of stories about that place too. You were meeting people like I would never have dealt with bouncers and people who, private security individuals who've been bodyguards and also, oh, it's just amazing, fantastic job. And we actually basically had to get these people through a process, get them regulated so they could wear a badge. And I still walk past nightclub doors and see that Security Industry Authority badge on their lapel. I think, do you know what? I was part of that. So that always makes me proud. But after that, I then thought, right, okay, I've got quite a sort of a liking for this public sector stuff. I've never done this before. So I then went to work. I know actually it was part of that job. That's what happened. It was part of that job. One of my team said, I'm leaving. I went, oh, right. Where are you going? Well, I've got a job with the Healthcare Commission. I went, okay, who the hell are they? Because I'd never heard of them. Yeah. I hardly spent any time in hospital in my whole life. Anyway, he got this job. And the truth of it was, he got this job and he said to me, well, I've got it. I need a reference. I said, right. And he was earning the same money as me. I thought, what? I'm heading out of department. And I never thought, you could earn more money, really. I was just stuck in this sort of rut. I thought, oh, well, anyway, it's one of those things. But good luck to you. Anyway, blow me down if a job doesn't come up for a head of a team at the Healthcare Commission, having never heard about it. This job came up. So I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to apply, just like I'd done with the last job. Well, blow me down. I got the job. I couldn't believe it because I also had no experience of healthcare regulation. Anyway, I got this job and it was the Healthcare Commission at the time. And I remember when I first met my team, all of them were nurses and this non-nurse had just walked through the door and you could see their faces thinking, what the hell is she doing here? But I have to say, they were amazing. They took me under their wing and they taught me all sorts about nursing. And of course, at the time of the Healthcare Commission, we were regulating hospitals, independent hospitals, NHS independent, and some of the private sort of sector, which was really interesting. And then, of course, things changed and the Healthcare Commission merged with the Mental Health Act Commission and the Commission for Social Care Inspection. So it was one of those places where there was constantly a reorganisation. We had to keep applying for a job. So at that point, we merged those three organisations and there was born the Care Quality Commission. So long answer to your question, but I think
a lot of people, Sue, won't know that. A lot of people, particularly in social care, just thought it was a natural transition from the commissioner, the Commissioner of Social Care
Yes.
Inspectorates to CQC, and they always thought that was just about the change in regulation with the
Yeah,
Care Act and the likes that came out. Because the national minimum care standards are what set about
that's
C
right.
Sky,
Yes.
and then the Health and Social Care Act brought about CQC, but they wouldn't have thought actually it was a merger of
And it
three different
was.
reg.
And it was
Yeah,
really interesting timing because I had this team of nurses and I was suddenly going to inherit a team of social workers. Now, I don't know whether you put social workers and nurses together in a room, but there was a whole interesting moment when the nurses said, well, hang on a minute, I'm not gonna inspect social care. Um,
yeah,
establishments. I'm a nurse and I don't want to work with such. So there's a whole cultural piece that I had to do in the team, as did others, to bring that team together. So that was an interesting time. And actually, everyone did get on and they did start to change their roles but it was very different. I mean, I remember the first inspection I did with the Healthcare Commission. We went into this hospital and we sat in a room and people just brought in files upon files of information. We just sat there all day going through paperwork and I thought, is this what I've come to do? I couldn't quite believe it. And then we did then as it sort of, developed with the early days of the Care Quality Commission, we then started to do local authority inspections at that time and doing similar things. But actually, and then over time it changed. But and I managed to survive all of that. I think I was there for about 6.5 years. So it was an interesting place to be. And I really enjoyed it and I learned a lot. And in fact, playing on to the piece about me not being a nurse, one of the first dramatic things I did at the Care Quality Commission was we went through a re-registration period. The regulations changed. We had to re-register all the services. And I was the only person that put conditions on a registration for a hospital in Buckinghamshire where there were issues with neonatal deaths. And I remember doing a whole load of interviews that day, and everyone thought, "How can you do this?" And I said, "Well, they're not going to be compliant under new regulations." So that was a really turbulent time. So I had some interesting times
yeah,
when all that happened, and because I remember my manager or my director at the time saying to me, you're going to have Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire. I said, well, okay, but I don't really live anywhere near any of those yet again. And she said, oh, don't worry, you'll never have to go to Milton Keynes. And then we had all these issues with the neonatal deaths. And it was very interesting time, actually, because I was there a lot. And I've never had a baby either. And I was dealing with maternity units.
yeah.
So I've had to learn a lot throughout my career very quickly and apply that learning to the work I do. And it was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. It was a difficult time and I had to learn quickly, but that's been my career, to be honest. I haven't always gone into things I'm an expert in, and then I've had to
I was going to say that just listening to what you've said so far, a couple of things spring to mind, and it makes me want to just question. You seem to be what I would class as a go-getter. So if an opportunity presents itself, sod it, we're going for it.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? I mean, were you like that as a child growing up? Were you opportunistic? Did you just throw yourself into things? Where's that confidence coming from? Because a lot of people lack that confidence, which keeps them stuck in a job that they don't like or stops them making a move that requires a risk. You seem to be almost risk averse in terms of what's the worst thing that can happen here. So where's that born from? Is it just encouragement from the people around you, or is it something that's ingrained in you?
Do you know what? I think that's a really interesting question because I'm actually I am quite cautious at times. And, that when I have to make some big decisions around, money and things like that, I'm actually quite cautious. And I don't know. I mean, I wasn't an outrageous child. I was very well behaved. I was a school prefect. I did all those things where I was goody two shoes, probably people would have said. And I didn't do dangerous things. I mean, I don't do dangerous sports. I like my feet on the ground. I don't do bungee jumping. So I don't know where it's come from with my career. I think it's just about developing my confidence over time, because I used to hate presenting, and now, the things I've done, particularly the last 2 years in this sector, I'm really proud of the things I've done, because I enjoy speaking and talking about the work I do at Barchester and really sharing that learning. And yet years ago I'd never done it. I think some of it's probably just about maturity. And I'm thinking, do you know what? Actually, what's the worst can happen? I might be out of a job, or I might actually do quite well. And I think I've just worked hard, stuck to my guns,
Yeah.
but believed in what I'm doing. And I think one of the things I've done is made some important life choices about where I've worked. So I've only really ever worked until recently, I guess, with what I would call household names, so British Airways, Vodafone, those, and then that sort of changed as my confidence as an individual grew and in my career. And so I started, and I mean, Barchester wasn't a household name. Everyone
No.
knows a boot, they know Booper, but they probably don't know Barchester. And our brand is very much about what we do locally rather than going out and shouting. But I mean, obviously, we are very notable in the sector now, but that hadn't been our sort of marketing drive. So I tended to pick companies that I agreed with their values, their ethics. They were sound, stable, successful business. I want to be part of a success. And so, but I knew you have to make your own success as well. You have to be able to do a great job, otherwise you don't survive in these organizations. So it was probably a combination of those sorts of things, really. And I think my confidence has just grown over time, and you get to the point where you're old enough, you don't care anymore, you just do it anyway.
Do you like a challenge?
Oh God, yes, I do like a challenge, and I like to be challenged. I like to be pushed. I like to be kept busy. Yeah, I do like a challenge, and I've had a lot of challenges in my work life. And I work hard, and the sector we work in is 24/7, and there's never a dull moment. And you get to the point you think nothing, you can learn nothing else, but you always do, because something else comes along, and that's the vibrancy of it all, isn't it? Really,
I think that's what I come back to. It's something similar to what I think a lot of business owners or a lot of high achievers, people that get to the highest positions, they all have something in common, and that is a lust to find out information, a lust to learn more. Because if you think about somebody that may be really good operationally, but they decide to start out on their own, it's a whole new venture. You've got to learn the finances, you've got to learn the taxes, you've got to learn the regulations. You're now going to be employing people. You've got to look at HR. You've got to end up knowing a bit about everything.
yeah.
And the only way you're going to do that is to learn it, because it wasn't something that you naturally had beforehand. But what you tend to find is the journey that you've gone on, you've been picking up these little bits that helps to carve out the you that you become in the future. And what I would say that I took from that is, you said that you had to go in and change a culture. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you'd gone in with your HR head into that alone, you may have hit some brick walls that were very difficult to bring down. However, because you had done sales, you learned how to sell something.
Yeah.
So without the sales, I think you'd have struggled in changing the culture. So that whole makeup of you, those things that you learned, put you in the perfect position to go in there, both with your HR head, both of your social side and aspect of people and their behaviors, both with your sales part to it, both the fact that you had worked in a male dominated sector where it was, with button heads, etc., like that actually when it came to the point where you were needed to lead a team to change things up, you actually had all the toolkit available to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's probably right. And I think when I look back at my career, I mean, as I said earlier, it wasn't planned. I had no structure. I did, I knew I saw jobs I liked. I tended to apply for things I wanted to do. And I didn't get them all. And I'll talk about one that was quite significant, really, that changed and caused my career again, really. But I think that when I look back, you're absolutely right. You build this person, you build this portfolio of skills and experience and your background, and then you suddenly realize what you've got in your toolkit, and it does shape you, it does enable you to do those things, and you don't quite know what you're going to do initially, but you just somehow you draw on that armory of things, don't you, and you just use all of that learning. And I think now, even the job I do now, I mean, people say, oh, it's regulation, it's quality improvement, but actually I'm involved in a lot at Barchester that isn't just my remit. People ask for my opinion about things because I've been there and done it. And we've got regional directors. Well, I've been a regional director effectively in a number of other different environments, but the skill set's transferable. And I think that's what, is important for people to think about when they're setting out in their careers, that actually you just accumulate skills and experience, and then you use them in different ways. It might be a different sector. And I have moved sectors constantly. I've been in retail, I've been in the airline industry, I've worked for a mobile phone company, and now I've been in the public sector, and now I'm back into a private sector, privately run business, but in a very big sector that is actually also quite local authority, publicly funded, driven as well. So I've done all that, and I've had that mix, and I think it does equip you, as you say, to do other things and to put your hand to anything, really.
When you actually have gone through these, because you seem to have progressed all the time into different roles, different styles of leadership, etc., like that. So in terms of that development, what things did you learn from each of those sectors that has allowed you to be so successful at Barchester?
I think a number of things. I mean, what's interesting also is those people you meet along the way who teach you things. I mean, one of the things that the most powerful piece of advice I've ever had, it was when I was working in British Airways travel shops, and it was a retail environment. We had travel shops, travel agents, it's really for BA, and they don't exist anymore, which is a shame, because it was a great place to work. And my manager there once said to me, inspect what you expect. Now, that was just about looking at retail standards. Was the shop window as it should be? Were the brochures laid out the way we had a plan, and all of those sorts of things? I've never forgotten that. And it's interesting that now my job is about inspecting. And I've always held that adage, and I've said it to people, you have to check what you're expecting to happen, otherwise it doesn't happen. So that was one of the things I did learn. I think you also learn how to work with people. I mean, I'm very comfortable working at all sorts of different levels within organizations. And, I have a huge amount of respect for our carers and nurses who work with our residents and patients every single day. It's not a job I could personally do. And I've told people that. I mean, I would be the world's worst carer. I'm just not very good with, that sort of work. It's just not me. But my husband's a fantastic carer. So when my dad got sick and came to stay with us, he was the one doing all the caring. So I'm not very good with all the muck and bullet stuff, I have to say. I'm really not.
Cabin crew management is used to care.
He's very good. He is very good. I absolutely have huge respect for the people in our business. I think they do an amazing job. They work really hard, and I've learned a lot from people who have just got that ultimate. Their goal in life is to care for people, and I learned that by coming to Barchester, really looking at what people do. And a lot of our carers go home and care for people at home. That is just in their DNA. And that's never been me. So in terms of other learning, I think, sometimes it's just about having a go. I've had lots of training. I've been really fortunate to work for big companies who've given me management training, practical skills training, and I've just sucked all that up and just used it. And training is only any good if you do something with it. We can all sit in a classroom, but what I've tried to do is make sure that I apply the learning I've had, and use that, and also develop my people skills. I mean, I've been managing people for quite a long time now, and I managed remote teams for a long time as well, and that's not easy. How do you manage people who are just not around the water cooler or in the kitchen making a coffee? And so I've had to learn to do that. And I mean, I'm a very visual person. I like to get out and see people. So the pandemic was tough because we were sat at home on our laptops all the time. I spend more time at my laptop than I do out in our services, really, but more than I'd like. But I absolutely love the people element. And I think a lot of the jobs I've done have been about front-facing roles, whether they've been in retail or HR. It's all about the people. And that's been an important part of my career, I think, being with people, delivering good quality service, because that's the other thing, whether it's Vodafone Retail, whether it's British Airways, or whether it's Barchester Healthcare, we are delivering a service to people, and that service ethic has always been important to me. And I'm the first to criticise service. They go into a shop and it's poor service, people tend to know about it, because my standards are really high. And I think that's the other thing, when you're in a compliance and regulatory type and standards environment, I think your own personal standards have got to be high. You have to be a role model. And I've always said to my team, we have to role model what's right because we're expecting others to deliver that. We can't criticize others if we're not absolutely at the top of our game. So those sorts of things are all the things that I've taken with me throughout my journey.
Do you think, I mean, if we go, we'll come back to something you said earlier. So you're at CQC.
Yes.
You make a decision that you're leaving CQC at some point. You apply for a job role. And I think you said you didn't get it.
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I actually, yes, I was in CQC, and there was, as ever, there'd been a number of reorganisations, and there was some jobs coming up. I can't remember the exact title, but it was something like head of hospital inspection. So bear in mind, I'd come in through the healthcare commission, so that my background, although I hadn't worked in a hospital, was hospitals. Then we merged with CSCI, and we had all the social care stuff, and then we started regulating dentists and GP. So it became just a melee of things. But this hospital head of inspection for hospitals came up, and I applied for the job, and I didn't get it, and I was quite surprised and pretty disappointed. And I thought, well, what do I do now? And I got some feedback from that interview, and I'll never forget, the person that interviewed me said, your heart wasn't in it. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I put my all into it, and I my background was in hospitals, albeit we were doing all sorts of other things, and I didn't get it. And she said, your heart's not in it. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I reflected quite a lot on that, and I thought, well, what am I going to do now? Do I stick with it, or do I go into something else? And I think it was about the time I was head of regional compliance, so I had the whole of the southeast. But this was a step up. This would have been a whole different role, and a promotion. So I was disappointed. Anyway, I decided that I wasn't going to stay. That I was going to actively look for other things. And things were changing at CQC at that time. There were quite a lot of issues. It was the time of the mid-staffs inquiry, and various other very notable cases where CQC went through the mill a bit, really. Anyway, I said to my boss, look, I'm going to start looking outside. I was very open and honest with him. And I was on LinkedIn, and I love LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn, and I saw this job, and it was a regulation manager at Barchester Healthcare. So I made contact with them, and they said, well, send me your CV. And I sent my CV, and they said, well, really, you've done a lot of other roles. This is probably not the right role for you. You probably need something a bit more senior. I said, well, okay, never mind. And they said, well, we have got the head of the department job is up for grabs, but we're already through the process, really. I said, oh, well, okay then. Anyway, I thought, no, I'm not going to put up with that. So I think I perhaps hadn't sent them my CV enough detail. Anyway, what I did was I contacted them and said, look, I'd like to be considered for that head of the department job. You might be through the process, and that's fine, but please just have a look. Anyway, the next thing I know, I got an interview and I got the job, and the rest is history. So it was really interesting. By not getting that job at CQC, it made me think, and actually what have I done? I've gone into social care, and it wasn't my background, but I thought, you know what, maybe hospitals is no longer right for me, and actually what I need to do is focus on the bigger chunk of the sector, which is the social care part, and that's what I did.
So for anybody listening to what you just heard is don't take no for an answer. That's what you just heard, right? You that second bite of the cherry. If somebody is sort of like closing a door on you, how do you jam your foot in it and make sure that they take the information from you? If you're in sales, that's exactly what you should be doing training on. So you want to get you need to show your product. So jam that door open and just ask them for 10 minutes. Just have a look. They can still say no. They can still opt out. But at least you know that you gave it every chance. You don't just walk away from a situation. I love that. And your career is littered with that. So you get the job.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to be honest, and you from my perspective, and in having a whole background career in social care, there must have been people in the organisation that thought, oh, my goodness, we've got one of the top people from CQC that now works for Barchester coming to inspect our care homes. That they must have felt that within the whole system of Barchester.
Yeah, I think probably, and obviously it was a bit of a sort of gamekeeper turned poacher, and it was very interesting that time. You really hit on something, because I'd got people I knew in CQC thinking, well, she's jump to the dark side, because that's
Yeah.
literally what
Yeah.
people told me. I got people in Barchester thinking, oh, right, okay, she's been a regulator, so how's this going to work out? And do you know what? I mean, it's the only time I'd moved within the sector I was working in, health and social care. I'd never, every other job I'd moved was from a different sector. So it was the first time. And it actually, that was great. I suddenly thought, gosh, why haven't I done this before? Because actually I knew what I was talking about. So I was confident that I knew the subject matter. I think in my first role there was to write a policy about, I don't know, I can't remember what it was about actually. But anyway, I started to show my, what I could do by writing some policies and showing some knowledge and experience. I sort of got my feet under the table a bit. But yes, but I think also it was a bonus in a way, because obviously we work in a really highly regulated sector, and to have some inside knowledge of CQC, having just stepped out of it, I think was recognized. And it also meant I'd got relationships, so I could ring someone up and say, hi, it's me, but I'm now at Barchester, can we just have a conversation about this, because this isn't quite right. So and I've still managed to do that actually, even after 11 and a half years at Barchester. Wow. There are still people in CQC, surprisingly, given all the changes they've been through, that I do know, and I could still pick the phone up, or I say to them, do you know what, I used to work for Barchester. Oh yeah, we know that. So I'm probably known for all sorts of other annoying reasons now, given I've given them quite a hard time over recent years, but actually I've still got that relationship, and there's people there who still know me from when I was there, which is really helpful.
Is for a company such as Barchester, and we'll go back to when you started there, sort of like the 12 years ago.
Yeah.
That is such an asset. And I've often said it. So whereas we may be seen as a dark side, you're not the first that I've heard that from. A good friend of mine was ex CQC inspector, very high up in the hospital clinical side, right. And she always refers to it, I've come over to the dark side. So obviously it was a common phrase used, but then we would say, that in social care, you're the enemy. So so this idea of we should all work in partnership, it's kind of, okay, well, here's our lines, let's see where we can go. But so technically speaking, it would be like, is it a good thing to have one of the enemy in a army now, or is it a bad thing? Are they going to infiltrate and report us back to CQC? But I would always take it and go, what a bloody asset we have here, because the biggest part that a lot of social care providers didn't understand, particularly when you're going back to the origins of CQC, is we got landed with the Health and Social Care Act, but nobody explained to us what it was. So we went from being told when our inspections were going to happen, which, by the way, was bliss. That was amazing. It was sort of like, it's happening in a month's time. The place was getting cleaned top to bottom for the month. All of a sudden, members of staff that you didn't want there on the day you were on annual leave that day. It was everybody's getting greens all over the place. And so when it went to unannounced, which was the right thing to do, all of a sudden you started to see some true colours of some of the establishments. And it's wrong for any social care provider to turn around and say that 100% of the homes were absolutely perfect. They weren't, and it needed tight regulation and inspection. So I see that as an asset, but I could also see how there would have been talking behind your back going on, sure, particularly from certain people. But you seem to me to be a character of absolute resilience. And I don't know whether it's the assassin smile that you may have. I'd love to speak to some of your colleagues to see how they describe you. Is it an assassin smile, or is it actually you are just someone that always tries to find the positive way forward in everything that you're doing?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you can be glass half full, glass half empty. Yeah. And, I've had my moments, and, sometimes I've walked into jobs thinking, oh my God, what have I just moved into? And do you know what, when I moved to Barchester, that I didn't feel that. I mean, the way we induct and welcome people is fantastic. And I felt immediately at ease here, I have to say. I really did. But I think you've got to be resilient. I think you need to be resilient in life, don't you? And I'm proud of, I had a pretty privileged background. My parents, my father had a good job. We didn't want for anything, but I know that that's not true for everybody. And even, I've had some real challenging times, and I've had to just pick myself up and carry on. And sometimes I've done things in jobs I'm thinking, I actually don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to just keep going, because sometimes you do just have to wing it, don't you? And you just have to draw on those resources that you've got in your armory and keep going. And I think also, I mean, it's better now. And this is a great sector because there's a real good mix of male and female, and any other denoting characteristics that people have. But equally, it's a sector where anything is included. It's a very inclusive sector. And I've worked in some very male dominated places. So it's great to feel that women have an equal voice, and that's quite important to me. And I think, but I've been in places where that hasn't been, and you have to toughen up. You do. You have to make sure you've got a voice. And I think it just builds you as a person and a character, and you just got to, keep going at times. But I think if you didn't keep going, you'd probably collapse, actually, because, I think life is tough, work is tough. I remember my dad used to come home at 6 o'clock. I remember he used to do work in the lounge and, do some stuff out of hours. But, he was home at 6 for his dinner, and that just doesn't happen anymore. And I think you've got to be tough. Hours are long. We all work really hard in our jobs. And whether it's what we do or in other sectors, everyone works really hard. And money's hard earned, and I think you've got to be pretty tough to keep going with that. And and not everyone can cope with that. I think it's hard, and I think there's a lot of demands on us as people. Whatever we do in our personal lives as well, and you just somehow have to find a way through that. I have my moments. I'm not always feeling strong and cheerful, but I think you have to. And then when you manage teams, I think you've got to be positive. You've got to find a way forward. You've got to be the person that's got some solutions, or you engage engage your team with those solutions, because they look to you to be that person. If you're miserable and fed up and angry and not coping, that isn't great, is it? When you're expecting, you look to your manager for that support, and if they're collapsing, that's not great for everyone, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Whenever I've done management coaching, which I do quite a lot of, it is a case of saying to them, listen, you're the swan on the top of the surface whilst your legs are paddling. At the end of the day, if below you gets to see that, then they will go into deeper panic, and now we've got a problem because we've got uncontrollable situations going on around us. So we have to find a way to keep control of it, which can make it quite isolated and lonely. But that's why it's important that they build their own networks to rant, because everybody needs to rant. But you should never I always say, never rant down when we rant up. So it's quite important.
Absolutely.
In terms of something that was striking me, I mean, British Airways, Vodafone, Department of Security, then you're looking at Health Advisory Board, you CQC. These, I would imagine, are all stressful jobs, particularly going into the positions that you were in. I think people would love to know, how do you handle stress? Because you can't sit there and say there's no stress. When government was going after CQC, that must have been such a stressful environment inside that organization at that time.
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of stress, and whether it's the pressure of the workload or it's external influences. And sometimes I'd be the first to say I don't always deal with stress that well. I think it's important to have an outlet, as you say, whether that's someone you talk to or something you do outside of work. I mean, I do love travel outside of work because it's great escapism. I have a very supportive husband who I can sound off to. I like going to the gym and exercising, but there are days when I think, gosh, that's been a really tough day, and I might have had a rant to my manager and and a few expletives and things, but you sort of, you finish your day and you get up, and the next day is a new day and you start again. And I think, everybody has it, and I think it's okay to admit that. And I think we've, as a society, we've got so much better at saying, do you know what, it's okay to say I'm not coping. And I think the pandemic really made that difference. I think it was okay suddenly to talk about well-being and mental health, and that's been revolutionary, really, in terms of how we manage our teams, and how we interact with colleagues, and how we look after each other better than we ever did, and the support that's out there. I mean, mental health has always been a bit of a taboo, hasn't it? People's well-being, and I think that has changed a lot, and it's been okay for people to say, do you know, I'm not okay, and can I get some help? And I think that's just been very enlightening over the last few years, and I think it's been okay. And I think as a leader in our business, I'm the first to say, look, do you know what? It's pretty crap today, isn't it? And it didn't go well, or I'm feeling really frustrated, or I didn't do that well. And I'm quite a transparent person. Well, I'm a very transparent person. My team will know. I wear my heart on my sleeve. They'll know if I'm frustrated, and sometimes, I have to think, oh gosh, I didn't say that as well as I could. And, you go back and you recast it. But at the end of the day, we're human beings. And, I think it's okay for people to have a moment. And as long as it's not something that is like that all the time, it's okay to say, look, I'm not having a good day and I need some help with that. And I think you have to be honest.
I think honesty, I think what the honesty part is so important, the transparency, because I think sometimes, particularly when we get into a position of leadership, while I'm saying we have to be the swan across the surface, it doesn't mean that it's okay. And I think what I say to a lot of younger people coming up, because I class myself as old now, so so that they're pushing me out. They'll push me out the industry at some point. They'll get me out, and the younger ones people like Louis will come through and
we all love Louis.
Take over, yeah. But he'll be killing himself listening to that bit. But the bit that I always say is, when I was younger, when I first started out, particularly in leadership, everything was catastrophic. When something went wrong, it was the end of the world. It was like, we're finished. We're getting sued. They're going to shut us down. They're taking away our registration. The police will be here in 5 minutes. It was everything. Yeah. And then what happens over time, and it's where the resilience is built up, is you work your way through it and you find out that the worst result didn't happen. So I think what happens over a period of time is those things that would have been catastrophic no longer become catastrophic. You just find a way to deal with it. But you have got a lot of younger people running around thinking it's catastrophic. So that's where people will say, you're so calm in those situations. No, if you take me back 10 years, I wasn't calm then. It's just that I know the outcome is unlikely going to be what you think it's going to be right now, because that's not what happened. It's like you get a manager that requires improvement, and it's the end of the world, and you're going, listen, they're not closing you down, right? They've given you they've told you what it is that we need to fix. So let's work on the plan to fix it. Yeah. But to them, it's like, oh, this will be all over the newspapers. We'll get no residents in. Yet 10 years later, they're still going. So it's those moments, I think, in leadership where experience does come into it. And what the younger people do is they bring risk and innovation. What I think, as we get older, we bring calmness and focus on where the issue is. And I think that's how you develop as a leader. So when somebody turns around to me and says, how do I become the perfect leader? And they're only 19, you're going, you'll find that out. I can give you some tools to help you along the way, but actually you're going to learn through every mistake that you make or every reflection that you have, because you mentioned before about reflecting. I actually think people don't realize that as leaders, you do a lot of time reflecting. You can almost memorize the conversation you just had word for word, and you'll pick a word out and say, shouldn't have said that like that. I wonder how they picked that up. And now you're concerned about it. So you're constantly thinking about how other people feel. And I think that involves the stress. That brings about its own level of stress. But in terms of coping with stress, like you, for me, it was, I've got certain things that are mine, that I see as mine, and they are privileged to me. That's going to the gym. That is my thing. It's 2 hours for me with a podcast in my head, bit of fruit in the bag, drink a liter of water, and go hit the gym for that period of time. And if anybody wants to try and disturb me in that time, it is, unless it's an absolute emergency, it won't happen. Even to the point where I'll go at 5 o'clock in the blooming morning, so I know they're all asleep at that point, because I want that time to be sacred. But if I took that away and it all became work, that stress would overburden. And in terms of what you're talking about with mental health, I think that is so important, because it's about lifting the stigma. that sat behind it. And I would talk openly for men because I still think men have got a long way to go in this. But I think also as leaders, we have a long way to go in this because we don't want to show weakness when we've got lots of weaknesses. So many leaders, CEOs, directors, managers, they close themselves they get very close to that burnout point because they don't want to reveal the weakness inside them. When you're going, no, you need support in that weakness, reveal it. That's what made you get to that position in the first place. Think about the pathway, the journey. So I'd love to see more done on it. But I'd love to see more done at it at the top end, because we always seem to want to fix everybody's issues, and rightly so, at the front end because they're front of service. But actually, you look at the the way the economy is right now, the strains that are getting put on HR through employment laws, the strains that are getting put on financial directors through cuts in money. The years of austerity seem to be going down. Think of the stresses that they're facing, etc., like that. So a big shout out to anybody. Seek support from a network that you trust and talk. It's so important. So I want to just touch on, and time is flying by on this. You're such an interesting person to speak to, so I need to watch we're not here at 4:00. When you first went to Barchester, it wouldn't have been the Barchester that most people know now. So you'd have gone through the growth of that business. How was it being part of a growth? And I'm sure there was moments where things were getting done that you may have had to put an argument against, etc., like that, because it was quite aggressive is the wrong word, but they sort of like went from a good sized care company with a good standard care homes to all of a sudden producing the elite purpose built 100-bedded care homes, almost village type scenario, of 5-star, and probably at that point competing with the likes of Sunrise Senior Living in that it had the American investment. So what was it like being at the center of that huge growth?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've been reflecting on that a lot over recent months, really. And I think back about how long I've been there. And it was a very different business. In fact, quite a lot of the people that were there when I joined are no longer there because of people moved on. And I joined at the same time as our chief executive, Pete Calverley, or just before, actually. And it was an interesting time. Our quality ratings were nowhere near what they are now. They weren't, meaning we had about 40% good and outstanding ratings. And we've more than doubled that at where we are now. And so the quality wasn't great. The systems needed some work. We had no sort of corporate governance arrangements really in place in the way they should have been. Financially, we were nowhere near doing as well as we are now. And, it was quite a struggle. I mean, agency costs were high. And these are things I've talked about in some of my presentations, actually. So it was a very different place. And it was really interesting because not long after I joined, we had put ourselves forward for one of the many CQC pilot inspection programs, and with a home that we thought was going to be great, and it came out inadequate. And that was a real wake-up call just after I joined, just after Pete joined. We just went, oh my God, what the hell's happened here? What have we got? And then we sort of had a big conference and we said, right, this can't happen again. Then blow me down. And then another one inadequate. That was real time, I think, where as an organization, we took stock of, we're already looking at, how do we grow the business? How do we develop? How do we strengthen our financial situation? And what the hell do we do about the quality? Because it wasn't good. And so we went into quite a period of quite difficult time from that point. And I remember doing a root cause analysis that actually created things that we still work with now that addressed, having that corporate oversight. And I kept saying to people, right, we need a governance framework. We need a governance framework. And it was only when my boss left and my new director took over at the time, I said to him, we need a governance framework. And he was saying, we need a governance framework. So I thought, finally, I'm talking to someone who's listening and saying the same things as me, because we come from, that place where we were compliance people and he was a lawyer, and we knew that we needed this. And we put all that in place, and we redeveloped our audit tool. But Yeah, I mean the growth program's been phenomenal. I mean we've had a sort of program over the last 5 years, and it's still continuing to build 10 new homes, not buy them, but build them 10 new homes a year. And we've done that very successfully. It was difficult at first. I mean, we built homes and we were getting quite poor ratings, and we thought, gosh, how do you build a brand new home and then
Yeah.
get poor quality ratings? So we've done a lot of work to learn. And I think, talking about reflection, we've done a lot to reflect on what hasn't gone right. What do we do to fix it? How do we embed the improvement? So we do a lot of that. We talk a lot about that. And we've also, and when Pete joined, I mean, that was probably quite a turning point because, he did rethink the business and think, right, okay, what do we want? And his mantra, and he's been a delight to work with and for, I have to say, his mantra, and has been the case since he started, is quality first. And whatever we do, it's about it's about driving quality, even if it costs us, because we know, and he knows, and he's a very astute businessman, which is why he's made, enable this business to be so successful. And as you know, we've recently been acquired, and for a phenomenal amount of money, and that's because we've grown this business. And I think we've all recognized that in order to be commercially successful, you've also got to get the quality right, because people will pay for things, and you've got a sort of sitting audience with residents, haven't you? They're living in your care home until they die. But actually, we've got quite a chunk of private funded people, and they make a personal choice about how they're spending their money, and they're not going to buy something that is not good value for money but offering good quality. And that's been what we've been driving for. So we absolutely you've got to get the quality right. And we've had a CFO, I mean, he's recently left, but I've never known a CFO be so interested in quality, and that's just been how we've operated. About the quality absolutely comes first, and we don't always get it right, but we've got the resource and the will to get it right, and that's what's been so successful for Barchester, and that's what I've really enjoyed being part of. I'm absolutely proud of what we have done as a business, and I feel part of that, and been able to contribute that. And obviously my role is about quality, but this is not all about me. This is about a team effort. Everybody absolutely believes that that's what we all have to do to work towards, is deliver great quality for our residents and patients every single day, 24/7, because that's what they expect, and that's what they should deserve to be receiving. And that's why we've been the success we have, and that's why we've done what we've done. And that's why we got through the pandemic. It's a steadfast, focused approach to not compromising on residents and patient safety throughout that. And Pete, as an ex-GP, we were quite cautious at times. We shut down early. We restricted access because we wanted to protect people. And we've had great leadership from him. And, I'm so proud to say I've worked with him, I have to say. He's just a phenomenal person in this sector, and deserves all the accolades he's had. But, it's been an absolute team effort. It really has.
I think of all the companies, and I do work closely with some of the larger ones and know near enough all anyway, I would say Barchester was the bravest. So if any of the others are listening to me thinking I'll have him over dinner for saying that comment. And what I mean by that is a lot of the other companies, so who would be seen as your competitors, their business model was very much to pick affluent areas and build there. So the cost of the build, the land acquiring, etc., like that, would have been a much higher amount, but the pool of people around there had the money to afford to pay for the care services privately. Now, whilst Barchester had done that in a few areas, you also went to areas where that money wasn't readily available. And some of those areas being quite rural locations as well. So it must be a phenomenal marketing team, because it's okay turning around and saying we're going to build 10 homes per year. But if we took on average, I mean, I may be completely out of kilter here, but I would say on average, that'd be close to 1,000 beds, if not more, per year. That have still got to be filled from empty, and that business has got to become viable and sustainable. And then on top of that, where your staffing is at a critical level and has been for a number of years within health and social care, particularly social care. So you've got to be able to build in an area where you can actually find a team of people that can go and work there. And then on top of all of that, drive quality through it, so that someone living in that rural Barchester home is getting the same standard as someone living in the affluent area, say Ascot. So that is that in itself, all of that. I sound like I'm doing a soundbite now for Barchester. Somebody will clip this. But that's why I see it as brave, because you've been so successful, but you haven't ducked the challenges anywhere along the way.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, that's lovely to hear. I think that you're right. I mean, it's never easy, and people would love to live in rural areas. I live in a rural area, but sometimes it's impractical, isn't it? How on earth do you get staff there? Do you attract people? Do people want to go all that way, etc., etc.? So yeah, we have done. I mean, we do our research, and we look at the capacity in the sector, and it's challenging in the sector. I mean, as much as is going out of the sector is being built, it's just a level playing field, isn't it, in terms of bed numbers? I mean, just people are coming out of the market, people are going into the market, and we never actually grow it. But so we do look carefully, and we have a great land buyer who looks at the land and where it is, and how close are we to transport and people, and is it somewhere people are going to want to move to? So and we do have a phenomenal marketing team, but we work with our managers. So their job, when we open a new home, it's a commissioning role. It's about getting out there and making those connections, whether it's with the WI or some other group. We try and also make sure we're part of the community, so it becomes a community hub as well. We encourage groups in to have their meetings and their events there, and we build those relationships with the local community. And that's why I think when I joined, I was quite surprised that Barchester wasn't known as a brand. I mean, I knew of it in the sector, but it's not the biggest name, as as there are others, but we prided ourselves on being a local. People knew their local home. So if I talk about where I live, I say, well, that's my nearest home. And they say, oh yeah, we know that. So we've really marketed on that locality piece, rather than in the big Barchester. I think Barchester's become more of a brand over the time I've been there. But yeah, and it's not easy. And sometimes we've opened homes and it's not been easy to fill them, and it's not been easy to attract people to work there, and that's probably still the case in some cases. You think, well, perhaps if we'd had our time again, would we have put a home there? But there's a lot of demographic data that supports you when you go out and look at sites, and we've acquired some as well, and we've disposed of some, but whether they haven't been as successful or they haven't quite worked for us, so it's quite a fluid piece. But yeah, I mean, we've got over 260 services now. So we're pretty much one of the biggest in the sector, and but it's we put a lot of effort into getting it right, and it takes everyone's effort, because everyone's got a role to play as ever in all of this.
Absolutely. So that leads me on to I was only told this news myself yesterday, and I hope you're okay with me mentioning it, but you are retiring from your role.
I am. Yes.
Now, having listened to you speak, and I'm sure other people will be thinking the same thing that I'm thinking, is you're not done. You're still too passionate. You still care too much. So what is the future for Sue Sheath? Where does she go from here? And don't say lying on a beach in the Mediterranean somewhere, because after 6 months I'll see you back in this industry or something like that. So what have you got in your mind? What does retirement look like?
Well, I mean, I've got a holiday to start with, a bit of a switch off time. I mean, it's not been an easy decision, and it's a very personal one. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be leaving. I mean, I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. I absolutely love working for Barchester Healthcare, and I'm going out on a high. The business has never been better or stronger, and I think it's with everybody's blessing. There's a lot of tears, and there certainly will be in the next few weeks before I go. But it's I've done a lot, I've achieved a lot. I think that my personal circumstances, if I'm honest, my husband's quite a bit older than me, and we want to have the time together to do the things we want. He's been very patient all through my career. He retired years ago. He reminds me that this year he'll have been retired 20 years. That shows you his years old. And he took early retirement, but he's been very supportive, and I think it's time to give him some time
Yep.
back. But yeah, we do want to do some travel. I have had people saying to me, "Are you really going? Are you going to do some consultancy work?" And people are kind of trying to tempt me. My husband said, "Please don't sign up to anything else right now. Let's just have a break,
Yeah.
have a pause, have a think about what you want to do." I mean, we live in a small village. I want to get involved in village life. I spent a lot of my time leaving on a Monday, coming back on a Friday, and not actually knowing who my neighbours are. But I'm sure I won't be doing nothing. I mean, we do love our travel. And in fact, talking about mental health during the pandemic, we started walking. We learned, we started joining walking groups, and we thought actually if we stay in the house we're probably going to kill each other, so we need to get out. So we joined a walking group, and I'm very fond of my walking group, and we get out most weekends, and so we want to do more of that. And I see it messages pop up on WhatsApp saying, "I'm going to put a walk on tomorrow, do you want to come?" And I'm thinking, no, I'm sitting at my desk working. So I want the time to do some of that. I am going to definitely keep an eye on things. I'm sure I won't disappear completely. I want to keep in connected, and it's such a vibrant sector. I will be watching what's going on, with great interest. And there's a lot ahead of this sector. There's a lot coming down the track. It's never a dull moment in social care, is it? And I'm just so delighted I've had the time to work one for Barchester Healthcare, but also in this sector with such amazing people. And I've got so many friends who I know I will keep in touch with. And I haven't always kept in touch with people throughout my career because people come and go and move on. But I feel I've made friends for life, and I'm sure I will be, in and around and having some access. But my husband's told me not to commit to anything right now.
I was going to say, what about the public speaking, Sue? Because that's something that's newish to you, but you've been received so well at care shows up and down the country, and the big ones as well. It's not even the little side ones, it's the big ones. So is your days on stage, are you saying goodbye to them, or is it never say never?
No, I would love to keep public speaking. I'm sure when I've got a chance to just have a few weeks off that I'll have the opportunity, and I do enjoy it, and I love the interaction with people, and I've loved being able to share what we do with others. And I've set up a network group in the last 5 years with other providers in the sector, and we've now got 100 providers in that network. And we actually had our own conference last year, which was hard work putting that together, but we did. And we had the big names, and I don't consider myself to be the big names, but the big names in the sector came along and spent the day with us and spoke on panels and shared their experience. And it was just amazing. And it made me realize what a network I've got now in the sector. And they ring me up and ask me something, and I ring them, and I've never worked in a sector where it's just been so supportive. And I think, this isn't just a job I'm leaving. This has been my life for the last 11, 12 years. And that's what makes it hard. If I was working, in any other job, I could just end the day and forget about it and come back the next day and start again. But it just doesn't work like that in social care. And so it's not just the job. It's about all of those people and the relationships and the connections and the energy. And we're totally emotionally, invested in this. And that's what's going to make it hard. And so to say I'm going to just stop on in a few weeks' time is probably impossible to say.
So I'm over 30 years ago came into this service as a care assistant, and I've never left it. So, and if I've gone and done something outside, I've brought it into it. So it's just, I agree with everything you've just said there. It's not like other sectors. Everybody will speak to everybody. So whilst we're technically speaking, there is competition. The reality of the fact is, I believe everybody is doing it for the right reason. And as you said, we don't always get it right. And, when I hear people turn around and say things like, there should be no CQC, there should be no regulator, I'm like, that's absolute rubbish. There has to be a regulator. You have to be held to account. At the same token, though, I think people are willing to share good practice. And that doesn't happen within other industries. And you see that when you go to these shows. You see that with the networking events or the forum pages. And I think as long as we continue to do that, we will get it right, or we will get it to a point where, it's not the dark side. Let's leave it at that. It's not the dark side, because it never was. No. It's actually an industry, a sector that loves what it does. Because if you didn't, why the bloody hell would you do it? That's what I always tell myself.
Absolutely.
There's got to be easier things. Right. Okay. Now, as you'll know, you have been sent through one of these pre-questionnaire things, and you'll be thinking, did he actually ask me any questions on this? And marketing will be turning around and saying, no, he didn't. But I did. But there's certain things that I do want to actually just talk to you about. I want you to speak directly as if you were advising a young person that walked into you that had career ambitions. So if you could leave one piece of advice, lesson, or reminder for that person, whether they're building a business, leading a team, or just figuring life out, what would it be?
Gosh, I think a few things, but I would say probably you've got to believe in yourself. I think, and I think that's probably come through the conversations we've had today. I think you've got to stick to your guns. Don't compromise your standards, and I've never done that, and if it's not been right, I've tried to change it. Not everyone agrees with that, but I think you've got to do the best you can, and I've always been taught to be the best I possibly can, and I know that's a bit cliched these days, but I think it's right. We come to work to do the right thing, we get paid a salary to do the right thing, and I've always tried to do it. I think you've got to embrace all those things. Do study at school, get your best results, because they do set you up, but actually embrace the experience, embrace the journey, because you grow through it, you learn from it, you take it with you, you take it into the next role. And I think it's bringing all of those things that I've talked about today together, because that's what you are. And I think people are individuals. You can't be someone else either. You have to be yourself. Absolutely. We all have great mentors, and I've had some fantastic managers in my time who I've learned lots from, every single one of them. And but I can't be them. I have to be myself, and I don't want people to be me either. I think you have to be your own person. I didn't really know what I wanted to do as much as perhaps when I look back at, you can see the journey I've been on, and it's had a theme, but that wasn't planned. But when I left university, I did this sociology degree, and everybody else went off and did accountancy. I thought, well, I've done all this work, I'm not going to go and be an accountant. I'm glad I didn't, because as I told you, my numbers were not my thing. But I think that people don't always know what they want to do, and I wouldn't say falling into things, but I've pursued things because they're interesting me. I think do what interests you, because you're a long time working, and if you hate it, get out and do something else, because otherwise it's hard work. And I think, but equally, sometimes the challenges are the learning. When it goes swimmingly, we're all fine and it all feels great, but actually you learn from the challenges, you learn from when it goes wrong, you learn from when you got it wrong, but it makes you a better person, and that's why you've got to stick with it and just try and build your resilience and just keep going, and it pays off. I really think it pays off.
I think that's a great point, that last one with regard to challenges, because when you actually, if you're sat there with some colleagues that you've worked with for a period of time and you're reflecting on the past, you always reflect against the challenges with fondness. You always say sort of, oh my goodness, can you remember that time when we had to do this, this, and this, and the whole world was falling apart around us? And it always ends with, how did we get through that? Bloody hell, she worked her socks off, or it was his idea, or whatever it may be. You never start talking about, oh, can you remember that time when everything was going amazingly well and we didn't really have to do that much? It's the challenges that you actually remember because you conquered them. You got through them. That's the moments of glory. So yeah, love that. Okay, last word, the lunch list. If you had the opportunity to share a lunch with any three individuals, past or present, who would you choose, and what would you hope to learn from them?
I love this question, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, so it did make me really think. And I mean, there's lots of people in the sector who I would put up there, but I've already had lunch with them, so I've picked three. I've picked three strong women in history, and it probably wouldn't surprise you. So the first one I've picked is Jane Austen, the writer, for a number of reasons, really. I think she was an amazing writer. I studied Pride and Prejudice for one of my A-level texts, and I really loved it. And I live in Hampshire, and she lived in Hampshire, and she just had a real sharp wit, and her observations on 19th century society were fantastic. And that opening line in Pride and Prejudice is beautifully delivered in the dramatization versions. And I think that I would have loved to have lived in that time. My husband said, yeah, but you needed to be well off if you were going to live in that time. I said, yeah, but I'd love to have gone to the balls and been doing embroidery, and life was so simple then. So I'd love to have some insight from her as to what it was like being a writer and a female writer at the time, because actually some of her novels were not attributed to her until she died, which was quite often the case in that era. And also who the inspiration were for her wonderful characters like Elizabeth Bennet and Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, because I just think they're fantastic characters. So that would be my first one. My second one would be Emmeline Pankhurst, who led the suffragette movement and won votes for women in 1918. I mean, I think, you know, equality has been a big issue for, you know, a long time, in terms of, you know, whoever you are, whatever your aspirations are. I think that, you know, that wasn't the case early on, and she and the other suffragettes really fought for that. And I really feel, you know, we're lucky to live in a democratic society. We're able to have a vote, have a say, and we need to make most of that, because they fought hard for that. And I believe, you know, that's fantastic. And I'd love to know, you know, how she overcame those challenges and really started that movement for greater equality. And it was such an important milestone in history. So
history, yeah.
And then the third one is probably a bit more frivolous in a way, but it's Princess Diana. And I've always been a royalist. I've always loved the royal family, and I had an absolute fascination with her while she was alive. And I used to buy all the magazines with the photographs in it. But she had her struggles, and she struggled being part of that establishment. And I remember crying the day she was killed in that awful car accident. And I would love to know what it was actually like living as part of the royal family. And it's so public at the moment, isn't it, with all that's gone on. And I wonder what she would have to say about her son and all that's happened with him. So I think that would be a fascinating conversation with her too, just because I thought she was gorgeous, and I loved watching what she did. And so those would be my three.
You know, you've named 3 people there who took on the establishment.
I know, I realised that.
Yeah, you've named 3 people who disrupted the norm.
Yes, absolutely.
All of them, which is, technically speaking, what you've done with your life, is disrupt it every time by moving to a different industry and challenging yourself again, and putting yourself in a position where it didn't matter whether it was male or female, you were going to be announced and known, and push your way forward. So I can see exactly why you picked those 3 people. And I think, and your husband may not like me saying this, I think there'll still be more work for Sue Sheath to do in helping maybe younger women actually come through and break glass ceilings and find that equality, whether it's writing articles and getting them published in magazines, or appearing on podcasts such as this. I'm pretty sure there is going to be someone that listens to this that goes, right, I'm going to go for it. And if you get that one person that does that, then giving up an hour and a half of your time makes it completely worthwhile. So I have absolutely loved this. I'm going to be honest, it's been one of my favorite ones to do. I was actually asked earlier before by one of the team, who's been your favorite so far. I'm not going to say who it was, but they said, what makes it interesting? Said, when I feel like I'm really interested and I don't want it to end, that's when I know it's one of my favorites. And you are one of those characters. So thank you very much for giving us your time. I really wish you a happy retirement, although it will not be a long one. Sorry, husband. But make the most of it. You have given so much to industry, but certainly to social care. And Barchester's name will be there for a long, long time. And similar to when you're walking past those club bouncers, you'll be able to look at it each time and go, I was part of that. And I think that allows you to leave a business or an industry with your head held high, knowing that actually you accomplished something and it was positive. So I'm sure I will see you around at some point in the future, and we'll make sure we say hello. But yeah, you should take great pleasure in the fact that you make a difference wherever you go. And you'll certainly make a difference to people listening to this on the podcast. So thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Okay, that's it for another episode of Behind the Briefcase. So remember, you've probably watched us via the YouTube link, so please hit the subscribe button. And if you are following it on LinkedIn, watch out for those updates that come across from time to time. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode of Behind the Briefcase, where we'll have another fantastic guest. But make sure you leave comments underneath. And Sue said before that she's on LinkedIn and she loves LinkedIn. So find her and message her and tell her how much you enjoyed listening to a podcast as well. I'm sure she'll turn around and say thank you, and it'll open up a doorway for a little chat somewhere. But let her have those 2 weeks retirement first, okay? Thank you very much. I will see you next time. Sue, one more time, thank you very much for giving us your time for today. We will see you soon. Thank you.